It's time for an update and forecast on the Madre fire. This is burning in San Luis Obispo County and Santa Barbara counties. And on the far right of the screen, like right above my head, you can see what this fire looked like yesterday when it first started around 1 p.m. And then there's an interesting little time lapse that we could look at. By 1:30, you could already start to see more of that smoke coming off of the fire. And then by 1:57, it had already rapidly increased. And it's continued to grow. At this point, it is 35,530 acres, which I was looking at the 2025 season. This makes it the largest wildfire that we've had this year, which is saying something because it only started yesterday. And as we'll look at the weather forecast, still some very hot, dry, windy conditions, and even a pyrocumulus cloud coming off of it right now. That's what you can see in that picture right there. Anytime you see that white cap on top of a fire, means it is about as active as you're ever going to see a fire. Now, because of that, the most recent update that we have to go off says Air Attack has requested one very large air tanker, 4 Type 1s, and 4 Type 3 tankers for a total of 9 air tankers. So they're really throwing everything they've got at the Madre fire. There's some evacuation orders, warnings in place, containment only 5%. The numbers only tell us so much though, so what we're actually considering throughout this video is where is the fire, where is it actively burning, and then given the weather forecast, where is it expected to grow in the future. So the first thing I always do is actually just look at the satellite imagery, because this gives you a broad perspective of not only where the fire is, but how active it is. You can see the smoke that was over the fire in the morning. Smoke wasn't moving very much. That is typical for the morning because the winds calm down and the smoke that was produced the day before kind of settles down to the surface. But then you start to see that little white cap right around here. And that's that pyrocumulus that we were just looking at the picture of. But we can actually just look at the full time lapse of it. So there's all the smoke in the morning. The winds pick up and you actually see that it clears some of that smoke out. That actually increases fire activity because the smoke sometimes can work in your favor because it limits the daytime heating, how much sunlight you're getting. But then once you do start to heat up, then you start to see those winds pick up and it becomes a positive feedback loop where the winds push the smoke out of the way. So then more heat's able to get in and then more winds pick up. And then you end up with what we're seeing towards around an hour ago with this pyrocumulus cloud popping up. That's basically just a fancy way of saying a cumulus cloud created by fire. So right here, can't really see too much, still kind of hazy. And then you see that huge vertical development of the plume, and right around there. That's your typical pyrocumulus. That's the first one I've seen this season, which is why I've already said it about 15 times in this video. So with all that being said, looks like it's active today. Now let's figure out where it is, how close it is to structures, and where it's expected to move. So zooming out, you've got Arroyo Grande to the west here. You've got Santa Maria. You have Santa Barbara down to the south, and then the Madre fire up here. Now, looking at some of the towns that are a bit closer that maybe aren't as well known, but would be more known by the locals. It's about 20 miles northwest of New Cuyama. That's a hard word for me to say. And then the main place that it's burning is the Carrizo Plain National Monument. It's also west of the city right here, Taft. Now what we can do is actually go into the 3D map. So you got San Luis Obispo, Santa Maria, Santa Barbara, and the Madre fire right about here. And the reason I like this one is they've added this new feature where you can actually see the air attack on the fire while it's happening. There you see that helicopter. This is real time. It looks like we've got another helicopter over on the northern side of the fire. And as we were just seeing on watch duty, they've got, I believe it was 9 air tankers on the way. The other reason I like this map is it gives us an idea of what kind of topography we're dealing with here. It does look like there are some little hills in here, some drainages. The reason that's important is because it's almost like if you put your thumb over the end of a hose and then it makes the water go out faster. That's what can happen in some of these drainages like this. It can take your winds and funnel them, so then that can lead to faster growth of the fire. And if we want to look at kind of where the fire has been actively burning, I always think this is the best map for it. So there's the fire perimeter. First thing we'll maybe do is just click on structures to see how close structures are to this fire. Those are those orange dots that I'm flashing on and off the screen. Looks like the largest number is to the north here, although we do have a number of structures scattered around this fire. And when I was reading through the watch duty timeline, it did say some structures were being threatened. Then what we can do is look at the modus and veers. This shows where some of the recent heat activity has been. The orange is going to be more than 24 hours ago. So we can see that this fire started over here on the western side. That's where you see those orange stars. And this kind of makes sense when we think about the weather forecast. It was mostly westerly winds. So that acted to push this fire mostly to the east throughout the day yesterday. Started on the west, moved over to the east. Where you see the red stars, that is where the fire has been most active in the last 24 hours. So I'd say one piece of potentially good news, looks like the largest number of structures that are close to this fire are on the southern edge. But thanks to, looks like there must be some kind of line in here that they're able to use to steer this fire and just the direction of the wind. It looks like the most active part of the fire is actually away from a lot of those orange dots that we see on the southern edge of the fire. However, that's, I would say, the most active fire that I've seen throughout this fire season, mostly on the northern and eastern side. Something else we can do is look at all satellites. This one, I always just say ahead of time, is going to over-exaggerate the fire, but it's very useful to see kind of where the most recent heat is coming off. You can see that southern side does have that orange, but even 30 minutes ago it was showing up as red. So it seems like that southern side is actually becoming a little less active. It looks like it's this northern side where the largest amount of heat's being produced right now, where you see that red color. So just coming into this map, let's try to get our bearings here. Figure out which way is going to be north. It's going to be up here that we're seeing the most activity, which actually makes sense. That looks to be where you have the steepest topography. And as we were talking about in my last forecast video, fires like to move uphill. So makes sense that the fire would be able to move pretty quickly on that northwestern side. It also looks like you have that darker shade. So maybe that's where you get more into the brush, which can burn quite explosively, especially as you get into summer and everything's very dry. Whereas down here, it looks like that lighter color, which is going to be grasses, which does allow fire to move very quickly, but it usually doesn't lead to as much intensity as something like the brush that you most likely have up in this area where you have that darker shade of green. So it looks like it is very active right now, especially on that northwestern portion. Then if we click on structures on and off again, that is where I would say there is some concern on this fire, because let's take the distance. We'll do a conservative estimate right there from where we're seeing some of those heat detections right now to where we have that large cluster of structures, 7.3 miles. And given the fact that yesterday this fire went from right there to right there, it moved 12 miles yesterday, we can see how fast this fire is able to move. And a big part of the reason for that is the challenging conditions that we have out there right now. Fuels are very dry. That's typical for California as you get into summer. But then when it comes to the weather forecasts, it's challenging on basically all of the three metrics that we always look at: temperature, wind, and humidity. So temperature-wise, I'm doing this for the city of Taft. That looked to be one of the closest cities to where this fire is. Around 100 degrees today. And then with the wind forecast, sustained winds actually not bad, around 10 miles per hour, but you see those gusts picking up as you get into the afternoon, up to 15 to 25 miles per hour. That's not exceptional. It's maybe not enough to create a red flag warning, but if you're in dry grasses or brush, that is plenty of wind in order to lead to rapid fire spread. So winds actually looks like they're going to continue to pick up as we get into the afternoon. So that's not a great sign on this fire. That activity could be increasing all the way until around 6 to 7 p.m. tonight before those winds start to come back down. And probably the first thing I should have said, this chart's very confusing. This shading on the left in the white boxes, that's today. Then you get into tonight, that's the darker shading. And then this next white column, that is tomorrow. And then on the top, we have temperature. This middle one is looking at wind. And then the bottom one is looking at relative humidity, in case that was confusing. So it's hot today. The winds are picking up this afternoon. It's not exceptionally dry, but anytime you have a relative humidity around 20%, that's dry enough to lead to some active fire behavior. And you can have little pockets on the fire that are even drier than that. Maybe especially like a south-facing slope, which is going to be hotter. There, maybe relative humidity drops down to around 15%. So for this afternoon, very challenging weather forecast. Makes sense why we saw the pyrocumulus development on this fire within the last hour. Where I always look for some kind of silver lining, it doesn't look like it's going to be as hot tomorrow. With that being said, it's still in the 90s, so plenty hot. That's all the heat you need for extreme fire danger. It's not going to be as windy though, so that is great news, especially the fact that this is a grass fire, and it's usually wind that leads to the rapid growth for a grass fire. Does look like it's going to be a little bit drier though. So hot and dry, not as windy tomorrow. And then one other thing we can do on this map is actually turn on the wind plots, because wherever the wind is blowing, that's the direction it's going to try to push the fire. And it looks like it's mostly coming from the west, which is going to try to push this fire more up into the north and northeast. That's why my main concern would be those structures to the north of the fire up there. So in case that was confusing, or in case like the weather forecast, you want to look at it yourself, here's just a cool trick I'll just show you very quickly. It's on the CAL FIRE website. If you take the latitude and longitude of the location of your fire, copy paste it, and then go into windy.com, you put the latitude and longitude in there, it's going to take you directly to where that fire is. And then on the bottom, you can see your weather forecast. We've got, actually it looks like it's a little bit cooler where we have the exact latitude and longitude of the fire than in Taft. So that's some good news. Although it does look like it's showing stronger wind gusts in that area than what we're looking at for Taft. So that's also showing that maybe that's the best way to get a weather forecast, because then you are as close to the fire as possible. So hot, dry, windy. With that, let's just look at how we did. We can go to the InsaWeb website. This has a lot of your summary information. Total personnel, 303, size 35,000 acres, perimeter 5%. Looks like wind sheltered areas and drainage bottoms experience topography driven runs with short range spotting. Greatest rates of spread observed on exposed ridge tops where you have the strongest winds. And then with the weather concerns, I think the big thing that popped out to me was light winds in the morning will increase from the west, becoming gusty in the afternoon to evening, all the way until the evening. That's what we're seeing, with peak gusts between 20 to 25 miles per hour. And then it also said relative humidity near 20%. However, there's a chance of some areas between 12 to 15%. So all that's to say, Madre fire, biggest fire that we've had this year. Challenging weather forecast this afternoon. So we're going to continue to see some active fire behavior. Although the last thing I will say, that pyrocumulus was about maybe an hour ago, and since then it almost looks like it started to decrease in activity. So maybe that's a sign that some of the air attack is getting on this fire. We've got more tankers on the way, and that could end up playing a big difference in what happens over the next few hours. Now, unfortunately, I am going to be gone the next few days. I'll be keeping an eye on this, but I won't be able to do any updates until maybe Sunday evening or Monday. But if this fire is still going at that point, I definitely will have an update for you. So hopefully this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.